Let's say you're a citizen of the United States in 2005. You don't have a job or any savings, and yet a sales rep from JP Morgan calls to offer you an adjustable rate mortgage. You don't really know what that is, but you start to imagine the house you'll be able to buy with the money. What's the worst that could happen? In this video, we're going to talk about The Big Short, a film about the 2008 financial crisis seen through the eyes of the investors who managed to predict it. The film's main achievement is to show what happened and what decisions were taken that led to one of the biggest economic collapses in history. Before we dive into the crisis and how it appears on the film, let's take a second to provide some historical context on how we got to this point. The golden age of capitalism happened between the end of World War II and the mid-1970s. In those 30 years, millions of people were lifted out of poverty, and the world's population doubled. In the West, this period saw governments intervene in times of crisis to help the population. Financial institutions were strictly regulated, and interest rates for all types of loans were low and stable. This was also a time where the average family could live off of one minimum wage income while owning their house. And because all good things must come to an end, in the 1970s there was a new economic recession. And the solution found by the governments of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan was to privatize everything and completely deregulate the financial sector.
How do you balance the budget?
Well, balancing the budget is like protecting
You don't
your
spend more than you take in, right?
Yeah, it's like protecting your virtue. You have to learn to say no.
So it's not really surprising to find out that since then, banks and investment firms have been doing crazier and riskier things with their money. Or should I say everyone else's money? The film is from the perspective of Michael Burry and other Wall Street employees, as they discover evidence that a huge economic crisis is coming and decide to bet against the economy. When the crisis finally hits, they all make millions while thousands of people lose everything. The film makes a point to deliberately explain convoluted concepts, because economists love to invent complex terms and names to make it seem like what they're talking about is more complicated than it really is. However, as the film shows, many of them don't even understand these technicalities and end up exposing themselves to risk that they cannot even comprehend. To understand what happened in the crisis, you have to understand that banks have been doing increasingly complicated tricks with the money they received since the 1980s. One of these tricks became the backbone of the economy by exploiting the foundation of the American dream, the idea that every citizen can buy a house with a few years of savings. This translates to tens of millions of people paying exorbitant monthly payments and a debt that takes decades to pay off. Banks, which benefit from having a monthly payment for 40 years, began to give loans to people with fewer and fewer restrictions. Some of the high-risk contracts were regularly mixed in with the lower-risk contracts to make composite contracts that were sold as if they were low risk. From there, an entire market of debt and collateral was created that mutated and changed hands over and over again, inflating the money system on all sides. The following scene perfectly illustrates the type of financial gymnastics these people were doing.
Hold on. Say that again. CDO-A has parts of CDO-B, and CDO-B has parts of CDO-A, but then they both get put inside CDO-C.
Yeah, that one's called CDO squared. CDO of a CDO. All right? And then there's CDOs made up of the opposite side of the bet you made with your swaps. We call them synthetic CDOs.
What did you Synthetic CDOs.
Synthetic CDOs.
That is fucking crazy.
It's not. It's awesome.
All right, let's say you have a pool of 50 million in subprime loans. How much money could be out there betting on it in your synthetic CDOs and swaps right now, tonight?
Let's see, 50 million. $1 billion.
What?
Basically, global financial institutions were built on quicksand, and when everything collapsed, governments bailed out the banks with taxpayer money. This movie does something unusual in Hollywood. It lets the plot be dictated purely by financial and historical concepts. We know very little about the characters, and it doesn't really matter. The entire film consists of white men arguing in front of offices, but it does an excellent job in communicating and explaining what led to the crisis and the mentality of reducing people to numbers in a system where money is increasingly abstract. It's worth mentioning that even though this is a critique of this type of capitalism, it is done in a very American way, where the protagonists are the only ones on Wall Street who manage to profit from the crisis. Banks are criticized for making bad investments, but little criticism is directed at the system that allows a few, the protagonists, to make a fortune while the economy is in flames. The film makes it very clear that the system has not changed at all. If anything, the banks now know that if they make a mistake, the government will step in with public funds to save them. The economy began to grow again in less than a year, and today financial indicators are growing faster than ever. The futures and derivatives industry that caused this whole mess is more accessible than ever, all while inequality and inflation have virtually eliminated the middle class in many places. The end of The Big Short reminds me of the end of Oppenheimer.
There's going to be a bailout.
Well, they had to. Right? I mean, paper markets would have
They
collapsed.
knew.
Cash would have stopped coming out of ATMs. They had to backstop this.
They knew the taxpayers would bail them out. They weren't being stupid. They just didn't care.
Yeah, because they're fucking crooks. But at least we're going to see some of them go to jail. Right? I mean, they're going to have to break up the banks. I mean, the party's over.
I don't know. I have a feeling that in a few years, people are going to be doing what they always do when the economy tanks. They will be blaming immigrants and poor people.
If Nolan convinced me that humanity is on the brink of nuclear annihilation, Adam McKay convinced me that the economy could collapse at any moment, and that there is an entire infrastructure in place to make sure citizens pay the bill when it happens again. Let's hope that this time it doesn't take a world war to remind governments that looking after the interests of the average citizen leads to economic prosperity for all, and that the quality of life declines for the majority when wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few individuals and companies. Let's hope that the next US government fights for the interests of the American people. Well, never mind.